Hello and welcome to AM Language. This is the 4 o'clock lesson with me, Richie. Let me just share. Okay, I think that's a better angle as well. Okay, so just let me share this now and we can then begin. And share. Okay, so guys, welcome to this week's lessons, AM Language. Today, we're going to look at how to tell a story in terms of like a past experience. So we need to know some phrases in order to tell a past story. So that's the idea for today. However, just to let you guys know, what can you expect for the rest of the week? Arena F, hello and welcome to today's lesson. I'm just in an uncomfortable position here at the moment. Let me see if I can just change. Okay, right. I think that's going to be better. So this week, today, how to tell a story, how to tell a past story. Irina F, hello and welcome to today's lesson. And Leondina, you too. Thank you very much for joining. Welcome to today's lesson and good afternoon. Buona pomeriggio and privet. Tomorrow, Tuesday, we're going to look at some listening skills. And we're going to look at true, false, not given. So we're going to look again at how we can go about answering these sort of questions and developing the skill techniques in order to answer those questions. Evelina, good afternoon. Welcome to today's lesson. Buona pomeriggio. Dennis Lehaf, thank you so much for returning. Welcome back to the channel. And Roberto, good afternoon. Welcome to the channel. Make sure, if this is your first time joining us, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Thank you for joining us, Roberto. So what we have here, Wednesday, phrasal verb quiz. So make sure you tune in for that. That's where we're going to look at, of course, phrasal verbs. And we want to try and develop your range of phrasal verbs as well. And then Friday is going to be, Thursday, using idioms to explain yourself. Idioms are really useful to know in English, idiomatic language, so we need to learn that. And then finally, Friday is going to be film English as well. So a lot to look forward to this week, a lot to learn as well. For those of you who are doing level test tomorrow, best of luck there. While we wait for people, I'm just going to tell you what activities you can expect at AM Language this week. Before I do, as always, guys, whether you're watching live or later, make sure you follow us in the live chat section. That is where the action happens. So please follow us in the live chat section. Let's see. Today's, okay, so the activities for this week. Obviously, later today, because it's Monday, there's meet and greet. So that will be happening. That happens at just after 8 o'clock as well. Tomorrow, you've got your Cathedral Valletta walk as well. And then you've got Make Friends, Speak English at Club Lounge. So you've got an opportunity in the evening to socialize, meet people, and speak English. Alida, buenos dias from where you are in the world. Thank you and welcome to today's lesson. We've got Cool Explore Pass. So that's on Wednesday. This means you get to go to Craft Village. I've never tried it, so if anyone does go, you'll have to tell me what it's like. And then in the evening, you've got bowling as well. Thursday, you've got the option to go horse riding. Malta, along the beaches, Malta can be a nice place to go horse riding. You've then got Surfside you then have Surfside dinner. So there's going to be a Surfside dinner at 8 o'clock in the evening by the sea. And then you'll have the option to go and play a football match if that's what you would prefer. And Friday, you've got the National Aquarium in Bujibba. I think. And then you've got scuba diving if you want to go scuba diving, and you've got Malta by night as well. Then Saturday, you've got Gozo, Camino. Uh, you, it's probably going to be a bit cooler now, but it's probably going to be really clean. And then Sunday, you've got south of Malta, cool explore pass, and a few things to do there. So there's plenty of activities going on this week at AM Language. So now I'll begin. So guys, we're going to look at how to tell a story, but in terms not a fairy tale story. This is not about Peter Pan or Cinderella or Shrek, like saying once upon a time in a land far, far away. No, we are going to look at expressions to help you explain a past story. Now, I am going to explain some past stories of myself, and then you guys can join in and tell me. I've got my notes here, and then you guys can come in and tell me about a story as well. Maybe it's something related. So I'm going to start off by talking about travel, because I've done a lot of traveling. So I'm going to explain a particular event in one of my travels. Okay, so this one time, this is how we can begin. And you've got a few variations. This one time, that's one, or there was this one time when. Okay, so this is your choice of expression to start your conversation. Well, start your story. So I'm going to explain mine, and then feel free to come in and give me your own experience. Now, this experience that I'm going to talk about is trying to learn Italian back in 2010. So in 2010, I was living in Florence. Evelina says, but in Malta for now, there is no lockdown as in many European countries? Question mark. Yes, no, Malta is not locked down like other places. So you just have to wear a mask, but there's no sort of lockdown area. So let's get back to what I was saying. There was this one time when. Now, this automatically means, guys, we need to always be talking in the past tense. So there was this one time when I was living in Florence, Firenze, in Italy. And I was in Florence because I was traveling through Italy, and I came to Florence and I really liked it. And I wanted to learn Italian. This is why I speak great Italian. Ha ha ha. So there was this, it was the first day, and Florence is a lovely city, but there are a lot of pigeons. A lot of pigeons. And I got lost. And there was this one time when I got lost in Florence, and I was looking for the place where I needed to go. And let's just say a pigeon, I got hit by a pigeon in terms of its business. Now, this is a polite way of saying something else, okay? I got a pigeon. We can say a pigeon, okay? It's business on me. Okay, so you've got this polite uh, language here for when something goes bad, mainly to do with birds. When a pigeon does its business on you, it's very unfortunate when it happens. So it did its business on me. So I got hit, basically. I was trying to look around for this place, and this pigeon did its business on me, and I got covered in some white pigeon stuff. So when I did find the place, I turned up to my Italian lesson in pigeon business, and I couldn't speak Italian very well, so I said "Mi scusi." Terrible. "Mi scusi, I'm late." Now, I didn't know what a bird was or a pigeon was in Italian. Now I now know it's ocello, but at the time I didn't know, so I invented the word. Now, in English, we have this word flap, like a bird flaps its wings to fly. Okay, so when a bird does this, this is the verb flap. Okay, so I invented a word. I said a flappily. So I tried to I know it's bad, but I am terrible at learning languages. So I just said flappily, and I was trying to. I took a guess. I tried to guess what a bird was in Italian, and I got it very wrong. So I said that a flappily did its thing on me. That was my great excuse, which was a terrible excuse, a really bad excuse. So that is my story of getting lost in Florence and then a pigeon doing its thing on me. Um, it's also a story about how I was so bad at Italian that I thought I needed to invent words that sounded Italian to me. Now, I do know that students do this as well in English. So if you, and so don't worry if you think, oh, I've done that in English. I didn't know the word in English, so I just made an Italian or a Spanish word sound English. I always do it, and it's a problem because it's one of the reasons why I'm not very good at languages. I keep on making English words sound Spanish or English words sound Italian. So you are all a much better student than me. So the point here is if you want to talk about a past experience, you can use this one time or there was this one time when. So guys, that's my story about being lost in a city which I didn't know. So feel free to try and come in and tell me about a time when you were lost in a place that was new to you. Um, in the meantime, I will move on to the next one. And eventually we'll end up whereby you guys have to decide which one makes most sense. We'll stop every three. So the next one that I'm going to go with is this. And this one is if you're talking to someone and you both know the situation because you were both there, so you remember. So you can say, do you remember the time when something something? So for instance, you could be talking to an old school friend or a university friend or an old work colleague, and you are thinking about the past and you're having a good time thinking about the past. And if you want to talk about and laugh about a past event, you can say, do you remember the time when? So I'm going to tell you another story. Okay, and this story is from when I was at university. A friend of mine was on the ground floor. So his bedroom was next to the kitchen, next to the garden, and it was on the ground floor. So if we know each other, I would say, do you remember the time when we scared our roommate on the ground floor? Okay. So the story is, do you remember the time when we scared our housemate at night? The story is that he was in his room and he didn't know, he thought he was alone in the house. So we knocked on the window. So he went to the window to see if who was there. And then we knocked on the other windows. So he began to get very scared. And what we did was, while he was at one window, a friend of mine went into his room. One friend hid underneath his bed. and I hid in the wardrobe. And he came back, and we started to make some noise, and we really, really scared him. So that so he starts getting very worried. He actually looks in the wardrobe. He looked in the wardrobe, but he didn't see me. So in the end, we jumped out, and we sort of really scared him. So that is another story in the past. And this time we're using, do you remember the time when? So if you want to, in the live chat, if you want to tell me a story about something in the past, maybe playing a joke on your brother, your sister, or friend, feel free to do so. I'll do one more, and then we'll do an exercise. The next one I'm going to look at is um, in those days. Now, when you hear in those days, we're going to be hearing it from when people are talking about a historical period of time, such as if we go back to the 1980s, I could then say, in those days, we didn't have we didn't have mobile phones, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have DVDs. We had cassette players and tapes and stuff like that. Um, we can also say, if we go back to the 80s, we can say um, in those days, we listened to Michael Jackson and Queen and Guns N' Roses. So you're trying to describe the period of time. What was it like in that period? So I'm now going to write 3 sentences, and you guys need to choose the most appropriate option. Okay, so you've got um, there was this one time, so that's one option. You've got do you remember when? Or do you remember the time? When? And we've got in those days. Okay, so sentence 1, okay, the first sentence. Um, okay, B. Okay, and the last, yep, that's right. And then the last one, and then I'll read out what other people have written. Um, uh, um, okay, so you've got A, it would take you 6 months to get to Australia. B, something when I try, oh gosh, let me write B again because I've missed out something really important there. When I was traveling, in Australia, and our boat was nearly hit by a whale, and C, when we were at your cousin's house and we watched that horror movie. So those are your three sentences, and you need to decide which ones to link in those days. Do you remember the time? And there was this one time. Now, Alida has written, which is to do with her own story. There was this one time when I traveled to Disney that I had to stay 2 days locked in the hotel room since a hurricane was approaching. Great sentence, Alida, and excellent use of there was this one time when. So very good. That makes sense. Really good. And the rest of the sentence is good as well. Evelina says, when I was little, I loved climbing trees like a candy cartoon. Okay, so what you can, that's a good past simple sentence, Evelina. So if you want to, you know what, actually, the right phrase for that is the next phrase I'm going to introduce you to. So remember that one, Evelina, because I would like you to write that one again, but after I introduce you to the next three, because there's an expression I have that I'm going to introduce to you that would go well with that past sentence. So guys, you've got the options here. A, something, it would take you 6 months to get to Australia. B, you've got when I was traveling in Australia and our boat was nearly hit by a whale. And C, something, when we were at your cousin's house and we watched that horror movie. Leondina has written, there was this one time when I went to London for a weekend and I lost the flight to come back. Okay, so you'd have to say, instead of fly, you would have to go with flight. Okay, and you lost the flight. Okay, flight is the noun, fly would be the verb. At that time, I wasn't so confident in English, and that's why I decided to improve my English. Great story, though, Leondina. Very well done. It's just that flight and fly, but everything else was good and really good use of there was this one time when. Evelina says, okay, thank you. Roberto says, A, in those days. So you're saying that in those days, it would take you 6 months to get to Australia. C, you've gone with, do you remember when we were all at your cousin's house? And B, there was this one time. There was this one time. What did I put that one? Oh yeah, there was this one time when I was traveling in Australia. Alida agrees with you as well, and those are the correct answers. So well done. Yes, A. I can confirm. So A is in those days. B is there was this one time, and C is do you remember when? So well done there, guys. Excellent. We're off to a good start. So we've got A in those days. B, there was this one time. And C, where we've got, do you remember when? And Evelina agrees with Alida as well. So well done, guys. We're off to a good start. Now, let's move on to the next one. The next one I'm going to introduce you to is similar to one of the previous ones. Back then. Again, back then, we're going to use this in a historical context. So we could say, if you're looking at, well, let's go with something that's in the past, but not really far back in the past. So you could talk this about back then when something was a bit different. So you could say, now, for instance, I support a team. I support Manchester United. And I can say, well, I remember when they were good in the 90s. Back then, they had players like Eric Cantona. If I'm talking about an international team, I could say I remember Italy, the Italian team in the 90s. Back then, they were really good. They had players like Roberto Baggio and Paolo Maldini. I can also talk about other things. I can talk about technology, for example. So let's say we are talking about mobile phones. I could say I remember, um, I remember the 90s and 2000s, early 2000s, when I first got a phone. And back then, the phone was very simple. I could text, I could call, and I could play a game called Snake. I couldn't take a photo. There was no WhatsApp. Um, the battery lasted longer. So back then is a good one to use. Um, Especially when we're talking about, I mean, it's a bit like, okay, in those days they are synonyms of each other, but I think back then is one that I personally would tend to use when I am making like a comparison, especially with technology. So back then is a good one to use. Let me know any comparisons that you can make from the 90s or early 2000s, another time in your life when you remember things were very different. Um, I mean, I remember a time without internet, without watching things on. I remember when Facebook came out, and everybody was like, "What on earth is this?" So then this leads me on to another one which we can use, which is back in the day. Again, this one is a good one to use when you're trying to really highlight the differences or something unique about the time. So you could say, for instance, um, let's say you want to compare. You're looking at travel, for example, or you're looking at sport or whatever it might be. You're comparing and you're saying back in the day we had to do this or we couldn't do this. Now, um, my example would be looking up things actually. So back in the day when I was at school, so we still have to say what time we're saying. So I'm going to talk about when I was at school. So back in the day, if we wanted to know something, we had to go to the library to look it up. There was no option to go on to the internet and go to Google. Um, so back in the day, when? Okay, so back in the day, us when, or back in the day, as long as we know what time you're talking about, you could go in with an if sentence as well. So, for instance, back in the day, if you wanted to know something, you you had to go to the library. So we can use this to make comparisons. Again, we can talk about players back then. If you like sport, we can say that back in the day, Roberto Baggio was the best football player, or back in the day, Maradona was the best football player. Um, we can also use it to talk about films. Like back in the day, the biggest TV, the biggest actors were Bruce Willis, for example, when Die Hard came out. If you're talking about music, you could say back in the day, um, Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin were the biggest bands. We always need to know, though, what the day is, because a day here means period of time. So as long as you make it very clear that you're talking about the 80s, the 90s, then that's fine. So at some point before, you just need to make sure you and the person to whom you speak know what the day means. For instance, if I was talking about, um, let's say, travel, yeah, flying, yeah, travel back in the day, and I'm referring to the 60s, I would say, well, if we think about the 60s, back in the day, uh, it was very expensive to fly, and to fly from Malta to the UK would take 8 hours. So we just still need to make sure that at some point before we've used this expression, you and the person to whom you speak know what day means, what period of time. Alida says, I remember the time of 86 Mexico World Cup. Back then, Maradona was the greatest player in the world. I was writing about Maradona. Oh, right, really? Oh, yes, that's because I came out with Maradona. Excellent, very good. Yeah, and that would be a good example of how to use it. Now, let me introduce you to one last one. Okay. During that time, again, during that time is a really good one to talk about when you're talking about history. So during that time, uh, I mean, this is something we are going to use in the future. For example, when we look back at 2020, we're going to say during that time we couldn't travel because of the coronavirus. So this is something we are going to be able to use to talk about the coronavirus in a few years' time, like in 10 years' time, for example. We could even say, for instance, we use it to talk about a lot of events in the past. So let's say we went back to a period of history, let's say before the Berlin Wall fell in Germany. We would say during that time, you could not cross from West Germany to East Germany, and you couldn't cross from Germany into West Germany because of the Berlin Wall. So this is a good one to use during that time. You're talking about, I mean, again, you can use it to talk about any time in history. It's a very good one when you want to talk about what people thought in the past as well. So when you are talking about, um, you know, people who wrote about life or what they thought the universe was back in, like, 1500s, for example, you could say during that time they thought the earth was the center of the universe. During that time they thought, um, the earth was flat, or um, they thought that if you went beyond the the horizon, you would fall off the earth. You could go back further. You could say, for instance, during that time, let's say talk about Vikings, for example. You would say Vikings, when Vikings were around, you would say during that time, Vikings would attack the east coast of England on a daily basis. So it's a good one to use. I'm now going to create some sentences, and you need to choose the one that you think makes most sense. The thing about these next three is that you could probably interchange them a little bit. Let's see how you guys do. Okay, so you got something, people did not have enough to eat. You've got Pele was the best player, and something, there were no women in politics. So those are your three options. Like I said, some of these things could be interchangeable, but let's see how you guys do. And then you'll have 6 really good expressions to know how to talk about things in the past, to talk about past stories. I remember when I was young, really young, um, and my grandfather would tell me about what life was like back during World War II, for example. So Leondina said during that time, back then, back in the day. So the first one you're saying during that time. So during that time, people did not have enough to eat. You're saying back then, Pele was the best player. And you're saying back in the day, there were no women in politics. Back in the day, there were no women in politics. Okay, let's see if other people agree with you. And then I will tell you what the actual answer is. If you agree with Lee and Dina, by all means, go for it. If not, let me know why. Let me know what you think your answers are. Or maybe all three of them can be used for all three sentences. So let me know what you guys think in the live chat section. I should add, by the way, guys, when it comes to writing, especially in the essay part of your level tests, try and see, and you're writing about a past experience, and you're writing about an actual past experience in terms of it wasn't yesterday, because we can't use this language just for yesterday. It has to be a different period of time. If you're talking about let's say your essays on your childhood, then you can use this language. Roberto says, back then, people did not have enough to eat. Back in the day, Pele was the best player. During that time, there were no women in politics. Okay. Okay, so slightly different answers, and we'll see if they make sense. What I can tell you is, let's look at the first one. People did not have enough to eat. Back then, people did not have enough to eat. That is correct. During that time, people did not have enough to eat. Both are correct. The answer for number one, okay, is all three. All three make sense for number one. Two, Pele was. So back then, Pele was the best player. Back in the day, Pele was the best player. Absolutely. Alida says, I think you can use three of them. Okay, well, in this case, number two, or during that period, Pele was the best, or during that time, Pele was the best player. Yeah, so all three of them again. Now, let's look at three. We've got, during that time, there were no women in politics. We've got, back in the day, there were no women in politics. And back then, there were no women in politics. You can definitely use two of them. I'm just thinking about back in the day. Back in the day, I'm going to say two, and then I'm going to explain why. Okay. Three, okay, I'm going to say back then and during that time. The thing about back in the day is that back in the day is usually used, and I didn't say this before, back in the day, we would use it for something, to talk about something maybe positive. Like back in the day, Maradona was the best player. Or back in the day, back in the day, we had to do this sort of thing. I mean, you can use it for negative stuff. Um, but again, you're trying to put a positive spin on something negative. Would I say back in the day? No, I'm going to say this because we tend to use back in the day, even if we're talking about something negative, we're trying to put something positive to it. I wouldn't use it with number three because if we say back in the day there were no women in politics, it might sound like we're trying to say this was a good thing. So we need to be a little bit careful. So I think three is the only exception here. For one and two, you can use all three. For number three itself, I would stick to using back then and during that time. Stick with back in the day usually has a bit more of a positive take. It's one of those hard subtleties in English because it's more to do with, like, let's say it's like the feel of the language of what we think the person is trying to say. So when we say back in the day, when I think of the examples, back in the day, Johan Cruyff was the best player, or back in the day, I didn't have mobile phones. Instead, I had to go outside and play with friends, and that was much better. So even if you're talking about something slightly negative, you're trying to still make it sound slightly positive. So I think that's the only exception here. I would say back in the day, use it when you're trying to give a more of a positive comparison rather than a negative one. The others you can use for every single one. It makes no difference. So guys, thank you so much for your participation today. Please make sure you like and share the video. And if you're new to the channel, please subscribe. I will be back tomorrow at 4 o'clock with another live lesson. So take care. Thank you for joining. I would like to thank Alida, Roberto, Leondina for participating today in terms of trying to answer the questions. I'd like to thank Evelina as well. Well done for participating. To answer your thing, I would say with your one there, Evelina, when you wrote, when I was little, I loved climbing trees like a candy cartoon. You could say back then, when I was little. So I would go with that. Back then, when I was little, Evelina. So thank you very much for your contribution. And Dennis Letav, thank you very much for watching as well. And Arena F, as always, thank you for watching the lesson as well. Take care, everybody, and I will see you tomorrow. You're welcome, Evelina. You're welcome, Irina. You're welcome, Leondina. You're welcome, Roberto. And you're welcome, Alida. Take care and bye for now.